Wesley Sims had been using the same winding country road for as long as he could remember. His father had used it before him, and his grandfather before that. It was a well-worn dirt path cutting through the valley, connecting the farmland to the town. Over the years, the landscape around it had changed. Where there had once been only open fields and wild flower-covered meadows, a gated community had sprung up. An homeowner association controlled development filled with perfectly trimmed hedges, identical brick houses, and residents who considered themselves superior to the people who had lived there for generations. Wesley had never had much trouble with them, at least not at first. Most of the homeowners ignored him as he rode by on his horse-drawn cart, transporting fresh produce to the town's market. Some of the younger kids waved at him, fascinated by the sight of an actual farmer still using a horse instead of a truck. Their parents, however, were a different story. He'd noticed the sideways glances, the whispered complaints, the way some of them would shake their heads in disapproval as Daisy, his sturdy brown mare, clopped past their pristine driveways. Wesley didn't pay them much mind. He had work to do, and their opinions weren't his concern. But then there was Karen Collins. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for about 5 years, but she acted as if she owned the entire valley. As the self-appointed ruler of the homeowner association, she took her role far too seriously, micromanaging everything from the color of mailboxes to how many garden gnomes were acceptable per lawn. She was the type of woman who thrived on power, even the smallest bit of it, and she had long since decided that Wesley Sims did not fit into her vision of a perfect community. At first, she had tried subtle intimidation, dirty looks, exaggerated sighs of annoyance whenever she saw him passing through, loud complaints about country folk ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic. Wesley had ignored her. Then she started escalating. One morning, as he was guiding Daisy through the usual path, he saw something new. A bright red sign, nailed to a wooden post at the road's entrance. Arment Road. No farm vehicles or livestock beyond this point. Homeowner Association enforceable. Wesley frowned, pulling on Daisy's reins to slow her to a stop. He looked around. The road hadn't changed. It was the same public route it had always been, part of the county's infrastructure and maintained with taxpayer money. The homeowner association didn't own this land. He didn't need their permission to be here. He hopped off his cart and inspected the sign more closely. The print was professional. Karen had clearly spent money on this nonsense. He sighed and shook his head. He wasn't in the mood for a fight, but he also wasn't about to let some suburban control freak dictate where he could and couldn't go. With one swift tug, he pulled the sign straight out of the ground and tossed it into the back of his cart. He hadn't even made it halfway back to Daisy when the front door of a nearby house slammed open. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Wesley turned to see Karen storming toward him, her blonde bob bouncing with each furious step. She was already dressed for battle, clipboard in hand, homeowner association badge pinned proudly to her beige cardigan, a scowl that could curdle milk etched across her face. "You can't be here," she screeched, jabbing a manicured finger toward him. "Didn't you see the sign?" Wesley patted the wooden post in the back of his cart. "You mean this one?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I saw it. Pretty sure it's illegal, though. This road doesn't belong to the homeowner association." Karen's face twisted with fury. "We have the right to protect our community from outsiders." "Outsiders?" Wesley let out a short, humorless laugh. "Ma'am, my family's been here for 4 generations. I think that makes me more of a local than any of you." She ignored him. "You're lowering our property values with this. She waved a hand at Daisy, who snorted and stomped a hoof, unimpressed by the commotion. "This eyesore? A filthy farm animal walking through our streets? It's unsanitary." Wesley clenched his jaw. He'd dealt with people like her before, people who thought money and entitlement gave them the right to dictate everyone else's lives. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his temper in check. "I'm just passing through, same as always. I don't bother anyone, I don't make a mess, I don't break any laws. This is a public road and I have every right to use it." Karen's nostrils flared. "We'll see about that." She whipped out her phone and without another word started dialing. Within minutes, a police car rolled into the neighborhood, its blue and red lights flashing. Wesley stood his ground as two officers stepped out. One of them, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, immediately sighed when he saw Karen. "Ma'am," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose, "what's the problem this time?" "This man is trespassing on homeowner association property," Karen shrieked. "I want him arrested. Now!" The officer turned to Wesley. "Sir, is this true? Are you on private property?" Wesley shook his head. "No, officer. This is a public road. Has been for years. You can check the county records if you need to." The officer already looked like he believed him. Clearly this wasn't the first time Karen had wasted law enforcement's time. He exchanged a glance with his partner before turning back to her. "Ma'am, unless this man is actually violating a law, we can't arrest him just because you don't like him using the road." Karen gasped, outraged. "But it's our neighborhood." "It's a public road," the officer corrected, his patience wearing thin. "You can't just put up signs and make up rules. If you do it again, you'll be the one facing legal trouble." Wesley smirked as Karen's face turned an unnatural shade of red. "You'll regret this," she spat, jabbing a finger at him. "I'll find a way to stop you." Wesley didn't say anything. He simply tipped his hat, climbed back onto his cart, and continued down the road. But as he rode away, he had the uneasy feeling that Karen Collins wasn't done with him yet. Not by a long shot. Wesley didn't think much about Karen's threats at first. She was the kind of person who thrived on drama, but at the end of the day, she was just another homeowner association busybody with no real authority. The police had put her in her place, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The very next morning, he noticed something strange. As he guided Daisy down the usual road toward town, he spotted a group of homeowner association members standing near the entrance of their neighborhood. They weren't just talking, they were measuring something, marking spots along the road with spray paint, driving wooden stakes into the dirt. Wesley narrowed his eyes. He slowed Daisy to a halt as he approached. The group turned to face him, and at the center of them, as expected, was Karen. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression smug. Wesley pulled the reins gently, stopping the cart just short of them. "Morning," he said, his tone cautious. Karen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Not for you." Wesley ignored the bait. "What's going on here?" "We're taking action," she replied matter-of-factly. "Since the police refuse to protect our neighborhood, the homeowner association has decided to make some improvements to the road." Wesley looked around at the wooden stakes, the bright orange paint marking the edges of the path. A sinking feeling settled in his gut. What kind of improvements? Karen gestured behind her. Speed bumps, gated entry, maybe even a few decorative planters. We're still deciding. Wesley tightened his grip on the reins. "This is a public road." "Oh, we know," Karen's smirk widened. "That's why we've filed a complaint with the county. We've requested that the road be re-evaluated for community exclusivity due to increased traffic and safety concerns." Wesley scoffed. "Community exclusivity? That's not how public infrastructure works." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And you're an expert on zoning laws now?" Wesley clenched his jaw. "I don't need to be. The county isn't going to hand over a public road just because you don't like seeing me pass through." Karen's expression didn't falter. "Perhaps, but until the county makes a decision, we'll be taking precautionary measures." Wesley looked past her at the homeowner association members, who were already hauling in metal poles, preparing to install what looked suspiciously like a makeshift gate. His blood boiled. "You're blocking the road?" Karen gave an exaggerated shrug. "Only temporarily. For safety reasons, of course. Just until we get everything sorted." Wesley stared at her. "And how exactly am I supposed to get to town?" Karen's smile sharpened. "I suppose that's not really our concern." A low snort from Daisy broke the silence. Wesley glanced at his horse, then back at the woman in front of him. "This is illegal." "Not yet," she said. "We're just looking out for our community. Surely you understand." Wesley took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. If he lost his temper now, she'd use it against him. He glanced at the homeowner association members behind her, some of whom looked less confident than she did. He could see hesitation in their faces. Some of them clearly knew this was wrong, but Karen had them wrapped around her finger. He shook his head. "You can put up all the barriers you want. That doesn't change the law." "We'll see," Karen said, stepping aside as if to dismiss him. "You might want to start looking for another route, just in case." Wesley didn't move. He didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he pulled lightly on the reins, guiding Daisy into a slow turn before continuing down the road. But this wasn't over. By the time Wesley returned home that evening, his mind was racing. He spent the next few hours making calls, trying to confirm what Karen had said about the homeowner association's request. Sure enough, she had actually gone through with it. There was now a pending petition with the county, asking for the road to be reclassified as a private thoroughfare. Wesley wasn't an expert on legal battles, but he knew one thing. Karen was overstepping her bounds, and he wasn't about to let her get away with it. The next morning he rode back toward town, determined to pass through no matter what. But as he reached the edge of the neighborhood, his stomach dropped. Karen hadn't been bluffing. A brand new metal gate now blocked the road, locked with a heavy chain. A bright red sign hung from the bars. Homeowner Association. Access only. No through traffic. Wesley ground his teeth. He climbed down from the cart, walked up to the gate, and rattled it. Solid. He turned, scanning the neighborhood. A few residents were already peeking out of their windows, watching the confrontation they knew was coming. And sure enough, Karen appeared within moments. "Good morning," she said, her voice dripping with false cheer. "I see you've noticed our new community edition." Wesley stepped forward. "This is illegal, Karen. You can't just block a public road." "Oh, but we can," she said, folding her arms. "The homeowner association has a right to protect its residents. Given the pending petition, we're within our rights to establish security measures. You don't own this land. We will soon." Wesley exhaled slowly. "Remove the gate, Karen," she smiled. "No." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with tension. Then Wesley did the only thing he could think of. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and started recording. "State your name," he said, keeping the camera focused on her. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" "State your name," Wesley repeated, his voice firm. "And confirm, on record, that you and the homeowner association are knowingly blocking a public road without county approval." Karen's smirk faltered for just a second, then she scoffed. "Oh, please. You think filming me is going to scare me?" Wesley shrugged. "It's not for you. It's for the county board. And my lawyer." Karen's confidence flickered again, but she quickly masked it with an eye roll. "Do whatever you want. That gate's not coming down." Wesley lowered his phone. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned back to the gate. Without another word, he grabbed the chain, planted his feet, and pulled. The metal rattled violently, but the lock held firm. Karen let out a dramatic gasp. "Did you just try to break homeowner association property?" Drawing a sage, "It's not your property," Wesley growled. Karen turned toward her house. "I'm calling the police." "Good," Wesley shot back. "Let's see if they side with you this time." Karen hesitated, clearly remembering how the last police encounter had gone, but she wasn't about to back down. Wesley turned back to Daisy, gently patting her neck. "We're not going anywhere," he muttered, mostly to himself. This was far from over. Wesley didn't have to wait long for the police to arrive. The county sheriff's department was used to dealing with homeowner association disputes, though few ever escalated to the level of illegally blocking a public road. Within 20 minutes, a squad car pulled up to the entrance of the neighborhood, kicking up a cloud of dust as it came to a stop just a few feet away from Wesley and the newly installed gate. Two officers stepped out, one of them immediately recognizable. Deputy Mason, the same cop who had responded to Karen's last call. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a weathered face that spoke of a lifetime dealing with small-town nonsense. His partner, a younger deputy Wesley didn't recognize, stayed back, watching cautiously. Karen was already marching toward them before they could even assess the situation, her voice shrill and filled with indignation. "Thank God you're here. This man is trespassing and trying to vandalize homeowner association property. I want him removed immediately." Deputy Mason let out a sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ms. Collins," he said, his patience already wearing thin, "didn't we have this conversation last time?" Karen's mouth tightened, but she didn't back down. "This time, it's different. The homeowner association has the legal right to protect its residents from unwanted traffic. This farmer has no reason to be here." Wesley folded his arms. "This is a public road, deputy. She locked me out of my own route to town." The younger deputy glanced at the gate, then turned to his partner. "That doesn't look like an official installation," he murmured. Deputy Mason nodded before turning back to Karen. "Do you have paperwork showing that the county has approved this closure?" Karen scoffed. "The paperwork is pending, but in the meantime, the homeowner association has the right to take precautions for the safety of our community." Mason exchanged a glance with his partner. "No, ma'am, you don't." He stepped toward the gate and tested the chain. "This is obstruction of a public thoroughfare. It's illegal. You need to remove it or the county will." What? Karen's face twisted in fury. "You're siding with him? This nobody over the entire homeowner association?" Wesley chuckled. "Glad to see where I stand in your eyes, Karen." She ignored him. "I demand to speak to your superior," she snapped at Mason. "You can't just side with some random man against an entire neighborhood of tax-paying citizens." Mason let out a slow breath, clearly resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "Ma'am, I don't work for the homeowner association. I work for the county, and this road falls under county jurisdiction. You don't get to decide who can and can't use it." Karen's hands curled into fists. She looked around as if searching for backup from the watching residents, but most of them seemed hesitant to get involved. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Mason raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat, ma'am?" Karen quickly plastered on a fake smile. "Of course not," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I'm simply stating that the homeowner association will be taking further action to ensure the safety of our community." Wesley shook his head. "You mean further harassment, right?" Karen shot him a glare before spinning on her heel and storming back toward her house. Mason turned to Wesley. "You good?" Wesley nodded. "For now." Mason sighed. "I'll file a report and have someone from the county come down to remove this thing, but if she tries anything else, let us know immediately." Wesley tipped his hat. "Will do." The officers left, and, as promised, county workers arrived later that afternoon to cut the chains and remove the illegal gate. Wesley rode through without issue the next morning, but he knew Karen wasn't done. And he was right. The next few days were oddly quiet, which only made Wesley more suspicious. Karen was the kind of person who didn't accept defeat easily. She had been humiliated twice now, first by the police refusing to side with her, and then by the county removing her precious gate. Wesley knew she was plotting something. He just didn't know what. Then, on the 5th morning, he found out. He had just started guiding Daisy down the road when he saw them. Large black metal spikes embedded in the dirt, stretching across the width of the path. They were positioned perfectly to shred the tires of any vehicle that attempted to pass, and even for Daisy it was dangerous. A single misstep could leave her injured or worse. Wesley stopped short, his blood running cold. Karen had escalated. She had gone from annoying interference to actual sabotage. Wesley dismounted and approached the spikes, carefully examining them. They weren't store-bought. Someone had welded these together and installed them with purpose. The metal gleamed in the early morning light, sharp and menacing. Wesley's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just homeowner association overreach anymore. This was criminal. He turned back toward the neighborhood, spotting Karen standing in her front yard with her arms crossed. She was watching him, her expression smug. Wesley locked eyes with her. "You did this?" Karen tilted her head innocently. Did what? He gestured toward the spikes. You know what? Karen sighed dramatically. Oh, those. The homeowner association installed them as an additional security measure. You can never be too careful, you know. We've had issues with unwanted guests lately. Wesley stepped forward, rage simmering just beneath his calm facade. You could have killed someone. Karen's fake smile never wavered. Perhaps you should take it as a sign to find a new route, Mr. Sims. We're simply looking out for our community's interests. Wesley had to resist the urge to tear into her right then and there. Instead, he took out his phone and snapped several pictures of the spikes. You just made a very stupid mistake, he said. Karen chuckled. Oh, I don't think so. But you go ahead and call the cops again. Let's see how much more of their time you can waste. Wesley didn't reply. He turned away, climbed back onto his cart, and guided Daisy back toward his farm. He wasn't about to let this slide. Karen Collins had just crossed the line into felony territory, and Wesley was going to make damn sure she faced the consequences. Wesley didn't waste any time. The moment he returned to his farm, he dialed the sheriff's office. This wasn't just another petty homeowner association dispute. Karen had turned the road into a trap. A legal gray area was one thing, but what she had done was a direct safety hazard. And Wesley wasn't about to let her get away with it. Deputy Mason picked up on the third ring. Tell me it's not her again. Mason sighed, already sounding exhausted. It's her, Wesley said, and this time she's crossed the damn line. There was a pause. What did she do? Wesley exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair as he paced his kitchen. She installed metal spike strips across the road, not just some small deterrent, real, welded metal spikes that could shred tires or break a horse's leg. She's turned a public road into a damn death trap, Mason cursed under his breath. You got pictures? Plenty. Just took them this morning. Send them to me. I'll be there within the hour. Wesley hung up, quickly attaching the photos and sending them over. He wasn't a man who enjoyed conflict, but this was beyond homeowner association pettiness. This was dangerous. And Karen had done it with full knowledge of what could happen. True to his word, Mason arrived within the hour, this time with 2 additional deputies. The moment Wesley guided them down the road to the spikes, Mason let out a low whistle. Hell, one of the younger deputies muttered. She really did this? Mason crouched down, running a gloved hand over the spikes. This isn't just some cheap roadblock. Someone took the time to weld these together. He looked up at Wesley. They were here when you came through this morning? Wesley nodded. She was standing in her yard watching me, smiling about it. She admitted the homeowner association installed them for security reasons. Mason stood up, shaking his head. This is reckless endangerment, maybe even criminal mischief. If someone got hurt... He exhaled, turning to the other deputies. Get these removed and bagged as evidence. We're going to have a little chat with Ms. Collins. Wesley followed as the officers marched straight toward Karen's house. She was outside, of course, watching with her usual smug expression, as if she had already won whatever twisted game she thought they were playing. Ah, she said, crossing her arms as Mason approached. Back again so soon, officer? Mason didn't bother with pleasantries. Miss Collins, I'm going to need you to explain why you think it's acceptable to install deadly metal spikes across a public road. Karen's expression didn't falter. As I told Mr. Sims, the homeowner association has the right to protect its community from unwanted traffic. Mason's jaw tightened. Are you aware that obstruction of a public road is a crime? That installing an illegal hazard that could seriously injure or kill someone is felony-level reckless endangerment? Karen let out a short laugh. Oh, please. No one got hurt. Wesley stepped forward, barely containing his anger. That's your defense? No one got hurt yet? What if a car had driven over them last night? What if some kid had ridden their bike into them? What if my horse had stepped on them and broken her leg? Karen didn't even look at him. This is between the homeowner association and county authorities. You have no say in it. Mason took a step closer, voice firm. Wrong. You do not have the authority to make modifications to public property. The county already ruled against your ridiculous gate, and now you've escalated to something that could get someone killed." Karen still wasn't backing down. "Then I assume you have a court order against the homeowner association?" Mason's lips curled into a bitter smile. "No need. We have enough cause to arrest you right now." For the first time, Karen's confidence wavered. "Arrest me?" "Yes, ma'am," Mason said flatly. "Reckless endangerment, illegal obstruction of a public roadway, criminal mischief, and given that we have photographic evidence and eyewitness testimony, the DA is going to have a real easy time making sure this sticks." Karen's face turned a shade paler. She turned toward her house as if looking for backup from the other homeowner association members, but this time, no one was stepping forward to defend her. "This is outrageous," she finally shrieked. "I was only looking out for my community." Mason pulled out his handcuffs. "Turn around, Miss Collins. You can't do this." "Yes, I can, and I am." When Karen still refused to comply, one of the deputies stepped forward, gently but firmly grabbing her wrist and guiding her into the cuffs. She thrashed for a moment before realizing it was useless. "You'll regret this," she screeched at Wesley as the deputies led her toward the squad car. "You're ruining everything." Wesley just shook his head. "No, Karen, you did this to yourself." As she was placed into the car, Wesley turned to Mason. "What happens now?" Mason sighed. "She'll be booked, processed, and she'll probably make bail. But the charges will stick. If the homeowner association has any sense, they'll try to distance themselves from her before this goes to trial." Wesley exhaled. "And the road? We'll have county workers check for any other surprises she might have left behind, but for now, you should be clear to pass." Wesley nodded, finally feeling some sense of relief. It wasn't over, not yet, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like the tide had turned. Karen had played her last card, and she'd lost. Wesley had expected things to calm down after Karen's arrest. He figured that once the homeowner association saw their self-permitted dictator hauled away in handcuffs, they'd back off, realizing she had pushed them too far. He even allowed himself to believe, for just a moment, that the nightmare was over. But he should have known better. It started subtly. The first morning after Karen's arrest, Wesley rode into town like usual, relieved to see that the spike strips were gone and no new obstacles had been placed. He felt a weight lift off his chest. Maybe, just maybe, the homeowner association had finally accepted that they couldn't bully him into submission. That hope lasted until he returned home that evening. As soon as he stepped off the cart, he noticed something odd. The mailbox outside his farmhouse was stuffed to the brim with papers. Frowning, he pulled them out and started flipping through them. Legal notices, a cease and desist letter from the homeowner association, a civil complaint filed against him in county court. Wesley's blood boiled as he scanned through the nonsense. The homeowner association, even after Karen had been arrested, was now trying to sue him for intentional disruption of the community's peace and repeated violations of homeowner association policy. They were demanding financial damages for the distress he had caused by refusing to obey their reasonable regulations. Wesley nearly laughed. It was ridiculous. The homeowner association had no legal right to control a public road, no matter how much they wanted to pretend otherwise. The lawsuit was nothing more than a desperate attempt to intimidate him into submission. But it wasn't just the legal action. The next day, a few of his deliveries mysteriously didn't arrive. Calls to suppliers revealed that they had been told he was no longer operating his farm, an anonymous tip that led to canceled orders. Then, the local market where he usually sold his produce suddenly had no more space for him. Wesley recognized the pattern immediately. The homeowner association, despite Karen's downfall, was still fighting. They weren't using physical barriers anymore. They were using their connections, their influence, their passive-aggressive tactics to financially ruin him. They couldn't stop him from using the road, so now they were trying to make sure he had no reason to. Wesley wasn't a man who sought out fights, but he wasn't about to roll over either. If the homeowner association thought they could outlast him, they were in for a rude awakening. He started making calls. He contacted the county board, alerting them to the bogus lawsuit and reminding them that this wasn't just about him. It was about a public road that the homeowner association was still trying to control. He called the local newspaper. The town had a small but widely read publication, and nothing got people riled up faster than a story about homeowner association overreach gone wild. Within hours, a reporter was at his farm, taking photos, gathering quotes, and putting together a piece that would expose everything, from the fake gate to the spike strips to Karen's arrest. And then Wesley made his boldest move. He went directly to the homeowner association members themselves, not the ones who were still blindly following Karen's orders. No, Wesley went to the ones who had doubts, the ones who had hesitated when things got extreme, the ones who weren't quite comfortable with how far this had gone. He found them in the grocery store, at the bank, in town hall, and he talked to them, not with anger, not with threats, just the plain truth. "Is this what you signed up for?" he asked one of them, a middle-aged man named Richard, who had been on the homeowner association board for years. "Did you really want to be part of an homeowner association that gets people arrested and sabotages local businesses over a damn road?" Richard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not personal, Wesley. The board just wants what's best for the community." Wesley shook his head. No. Karen wanted what was best for herself, and now, even with her gone, you're all still letting her run things from behind bars? Is that what you want? To be the next one sued? Because if you keep pushing, that's exactly what's coming. Richard had no answer for that, and Wesley saw the realization finally start to sink in. By the time the newspaper article hit the stands, the tide had already begun to turn. The headline was brutal. Homeowner Association power trip leads. To arrest. Local farmer targeted in ongoing dispute. The story laid everything bare. Karen's arrest, the illegal spike strips, the way the homeowner association was still trying to destroy Wesley financially. It didn't take long for public opinion to shift. Suddenly, the homeowner association members who had backed Karen weren't so eager to be on the wrong side of the law. A few resigned from the board immediately. Others started publicly distancing themselves from the lawsuit. And then the final blow came. The county board held an emergency meeting regarding the situation. They officially rejected the homeowner association's attempt to claim control over the road and ruled that any further interference would be met with severe fines and legal consequences. Wesley wasn't the only one watching when the news came in. The remaining homeowner association leaders received the ruling in silence, knowing full well what it meant. They had lost. Completely. A week later, Wesley rode down the road again, this time without a single obstacle in his way. No gates, no spike strips, no Karen. Daisy's hooves clopped peacefully against the dirt, the sound unbothered by anything or anyone trying to stop them. As he passed by the homeowner association neighborhood, he caught sight of Richard standing by his mailbox. The man raised a hesitant hand in greeting. Wesley nodded back. Maybe, just maybe, things would settle down now. Or at the very least, the next time Karen or the homeowner association tried to pull something, they'd know exactly who they were messing with.